In this video, we'll be walking through the endpoint assessment requirements for the Level 3 HR support. The purpose of this video is to provide you with a clear understanding of the endpoint assessment process so that you understand why and when this happens, what's involved and what your responsibilities are. So by the end of this video, you'll have a clear understanding of the requirements of the HR support endpoint assessment and also how DSW can help you. In this video, we'll be going through what is endpoint assessment, assessment design and delivery, when does endpoint assessment happen, what happens during endpoint assessment, and we'll then take a deeper look into the standard, looking at its components, the consultative project and professional discussion. So what is endpoint assessment? Endpoint assessment is a name given to a series of assessments an apprentice must take to prove their ability to do the job that they've been training for. These take place at the end of an apprenticeship following a period of training and development, often referred to as the on-programme period. The focus of the endpoint assessment is on the apprentice being able to prove their competence in their role through the work that they've done. This entails demonstrating competence in the defined learning outcomes derived from competencies set out in the standard. And the endpoint assessment forms 100% of the assessment of the apprenticeship. Assessment design and delivery. All of our assessment materials are created in line with the robust design principles that are recognised by Ofqual. And these principles are validity, reliability and comparability, manageability and minimising bias. So when does endpoint assessment happen? The endpoint assessment phase begins when the on-programme phase of the apprenticeship has been completed, the apprentice has achieved the required functional skills, and the employer and training provider agree with the apprentice that they're competent and ready to move on to the endpoint assessment phase. The apprentice then reaches gateway and starts preparing to go through the endpoint assessment process. So what happens during endpoint assessment? The apprentice will complete the required assessments with continued support from the employer and the training provider. All of the assessments must be passed for the apprentice to be deemed competent, and typically this will be completed over a 3-month period before the completion date is reached. The endpoint assessment forms 100% of the assessment of the apprenticeship, and the HR support endpoint assessment is made up of 2 components, the consultative project and the professional discussion. And we'll now take a closer look at the consultative project. So the consultative project is scoped out at the start of the endpoint assessment. This is done using a project proposal form. It is sent off to DSW once the apprentice has come through gateway and will be signed off by the endpoint assessor. And the project is a real example of the work done by the apprentice in their role. It will be completed after gateway and take a maximum of 3 months. It describes a situation where the apprentice has successfully worked to deliver a specific piece of HR advice or provide a HR solution. And within the project report, they should include project objectives, scope of work, description of the situation, problem or business need, methodology used, information gathered and findings, conclusions and recommendations, and an implementation plan. DSW will provide a consultative project referencing table, and this can be found within our toolkit. The referencing table breaks down the knowledge, skills and behaviours into 25 separate learning outcomes, all of which must be covered in the project. The apprentice may request to carry over up to 3 learning outcomes into the professional discussion, but prior permission must be agreed at the project proposal stage. The referencing table is used to map evidence against each learning outcome, ensuring full coverage of the standard. And apprentices are responsible for collating their own consultative project. However, they should be supported by the training provider and employer to identify appropriate evidence and map it to the standard. The apprentice must compile a project report, which can only be started once gateway has been approved. And the work out for this report is 3,000 words plus 10%, and anything above this will not be assessed. Evidence may also be used to back up the consultative project, and it may be included as an appendices. The evidence should provide examples across the knowledge, skills and behaviours, using a range of evidence types that best demonstrate competence for their role and to ensure breadth of the evidence base. The evidence must be a combination of anecdotal, performance and product. I will now take a look at the professional discussion. So the professional discussion is a structured discussion between the apprentice and the endpoint assessor, and this is carried out remotely by video conferencing systems, so this may be Zoom or WebEx. It's conducted after the endpoint assessor has reviewed and marked the consultative project. The purpose of the discussion is to explore the 13 skills and behaviours and the 3 distinction criteria, to build a cumulative picture of performance against the standard, and to cover off up to 3 learning outcomes where there's no opportunity to evidence this within the consultative project. And the professional discussion will last between 60 and 75 minutes. I will now take a look at the overall scoring and grading. So the grades available for this apprenticeship are fail, pass and distinction. The overall grade is decided by the independent endpoint assessor and is based on a combination of the consultative project and professional discussion. And the table on screen shows the marks required to meet each of those gradings. So to achieve a distinction, apprentices will need to achieve 85 to 100 marks. For pass, they will need 60 to 84 marks, and a fail will be 59 marks or less. And each assessment method is marked separately, and the apprentice will receive the results within 5 working days of the assessment. If you have any questions or queries about this standard, please don't hesitate to get in touch using the information on screen.